We are back with a small January wrap-up. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lisa, and for today's video, I'm going to be doing a very condensed version of my January wrap-up. January was an amazing month for me. It started off really strong with a 1 week and a bit of vacation, so I was able to just snuggle up in bed and read a lot of books on my Kindle, which I really greatly appreciated, and obviously my Goodreads challenge greatly appreciated too as well. I did an amazing job. I read around 40-something books, which I'm quite proud of, although in the past couple of years of my reading challenge, I have documented each month and my progress, and January usually is like the highest month that I have ever in the whole year, mostly because January starts off with me going strong, me wanting to beat my reading challenge right off the bat, and me just reading as many books as possible. And so this month just so happened to be a really good number, but it also was not the best number that I've seen in the past 5 years or so since I've started the reading challenge. I also want to preface this video by saying that I will not be going through all 40 books of the books that I've read in January, and I'll only be talking about select books that I think that you should pay special attention to and that you should add to your TBR, and also books that maybe you want to avoid as well. I also want to preface this video by saying that this video is actually filmed in the beginning of February, and actually February is the Black History Month, and a lot of creators here on BookTube and also Instagram have created this really awesome readathon. It's called the Black Author Readathon, and it's basically you read as many Black authors as possible and you kind of support Black authors throughout the month, which I find very fantastic because in the month of January, I actually did a great job at reading a lot of new to me authors who were Black, and they were just so amazing. So let's just get started with this wrap up right away. So the first book that I want to talk about is actually a very short novella. It's a second chance romance called Small Town Curves by Deanna Gray. And now this book follows two characters who kind of grew up together. They were childhood friends, and then afterwards they kind of separated to go out in their adult lives. What happens is that our main hero is very in love with our main heroine, but our heroine grew up with not the same feelings. She's just kind of just there, but until he kind of comes back and he's a grown man and he's well seasoned, he knows what he wants in life, and what he does want in life is actually not her, but to actually get over her, because his life has been torturous by always having these emotions and always yearning for her. So they kind of devise a plan together by working together to get over her. But in the process, our main heroine actually falls in love with our hero. This book is very small, by meaning that is that it's by a indie romance author that nobody has really talked about. And this book actually only has 13 ratings so far on Goodreads. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a very enjoyable read. It flew by really quickly, and then it also had really quirky characters too as well, and quirky elements to the plot line, which I found really amazing. So definitely go check it out if it's something that you want to read. I forgot if it was on Kindle Limited or not, because I actually found it on Amazon and then I pre-ordered it since it was only $1.29 here in Canada. So the next book that I want to talk about is also another novella that I really enjoyed. This one's from an author called Sora Lee Davis, and she's actually an author that I found on Instagram randomly. I found her through my following, like I followed her but I forgot about her books, and then I saw her in a hashtag, so I decided to try out her books. Her books are available on Kindle Unlimited, and this book is called Mixing It Up, and I really do enjoy her book. If you guys follow me on Instagram, and if you guys don't follow me on Instagram yet, definitely go follow my Instagram because I'm very active there. I post a lot of stories, and I also talk about all the books that I'm currently reading and the books that I really want to read more quicker than here on BookTube. So with this book called Mixing It Up. So with Mixing It Up, this book actually follows our main heroine who is actually in love with her best friend's younger brother. So it's an age gap romance between an older female and a younger man. And then this kind of plays into the difficulties of them actually getting together, because our main heroine thinks that it's really weird that she is in love with her best friend's younger brother, and the younger brother doesn't think it's weird at all, but this is how he tries to persuade her to lean her side so that they can actually be together, but also ultimately her figuring out what she actually wants in life and to not toy around other people's feelings and emotions. This one I really enjoyed, and I actually love Sora Lee Davis's works, so I highly recommend you to check out her indie romance novels because she has very, very low ratings. Right now, this book is only sitting at 3 ratings on Goodreads, so definitely read her book and definitely review her and support her. And this one, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I want to talk about is actually a Christmas holiday novella that I picked up after the holidays, and honestly, that was kind of like a bad thing for me because mostly I was kind of over the holidays at that point, so it kind of affected my impact of enjoyment for this book. Now, this book is called Wrapped Up in You by Talia Hibbert, and I'm a huge fan of Talia Hibbert's works. So this one is actually kind of reminds me of a Chris Evans fan fiction story because our main hero is actually white and he is a very famous billion-dollar actor. He's really hot. Everybody really wants to be with him, or everybody wants to be him. And then he returns back home to the holidays to meet with his childhood best friend, who just so happens to be our main heroine. And this is kind of about our main heroine accepting the fact that she got over a divorce and that she is ready for another relationship, and hopefully maybe this time she falls in love with someone that's actually right for her, which just so happens to be our main hero. Now, because it was kind of set in a Christmas holiday season, I kind of wasn't into the story, so that's why I only gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. But nonetheless, Talia Hibbert writes really great books. So the next book that I read was actually another book from Sora Lee Davis. This one's called On the Line. Now, this one's kind of a high school, young adult, new adult kind of romance. I would say it's more young adult, but mostly because they are still in high school. Basically, our main heroine is Black and she goes to this public school and she has to take the subway every single day. One of her trips, she actually bumps into this really cute white preppy guy, and turns out that this guy actually goes to school in this wealthy, prestigious prep school that she would never even think that she would be able to fit in, basically. And they have a friendship that blossoms into something more, and it talks about being an interracial couple and kind of talks about racism. It talks about prejudice. It also talks about a lot of insecurities that a lot of people actually have in interracial relationships, and I really like the discussion that they had in this book. And because this was a young adult book, I kind of expected the writing to be a little bit more tighter, so that's why I kind of gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. But definitely, if you guys are into young adult romance novels, check this book out. I believe it's available on Kindle Unlimited, so go ahead, go read it, go support a small indie author. This book only has 2 ratings so far on Goodreads. So speaking of young adult novels, the next book that I want to talk about is actually another one that was suggested to me from my friend Deja from Deja Saurus, or City of Deja on Instagram. I forgot her usernames. I'm so sorry, Deja. But this book is called I Want to Be Where You Are by Christina Forrest. And now this book follows a ballet dancer, and she is a Black ballet dancer, and she wants to, all her life, she just wants to go to university for ballet, and she really wants to go into arts. She doesn't really have any interest in going into a proper path in her life to get a proper job and things like that, so she just wants to dance. But her mother kind of forbids her from doing anything, mostly because of trauma and things that happened in their lives that caused her a lot of grief. So our main character, our main heroine, actually decides to go on a road trip by herself to go audition. But what happens is that the next door neighbor, who she actually hates because he's really rude and that he hurt her feelings a long time ago during high school years, actually jumps along and rides along with her and goes along with her to this road trip with his smelly dog. And this is kind of like a road trip romance between these 2 characters who are used to be good friends and then they became enemies. And now that it's an enemies to lovers romance, I thought it talked about a lot of great issues that I never really thought that young adult novels would really talk about much. It talked about passing of a loved one, it talked about grief handling, and it talked about a lot of serious issues. So really enjoyed it. This one I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I took a star off only because it's young adult and I'm not really a young adult anymore, so I find myself lacking and disconnect when it comes to certain issues in young adult novels. Now, the next book that I want to talk about is actually a book that I talked about in one of my experiment videos where I read books that were recommended to me from my favorite K-pop artists. And now this one's called Kim Jiyoung, born 1982 by Choi Nam-joon. And this one was absolutely one of my favorite books. So it's just a fantastic. It's about this character, or it's about this woman who kind of grew up in society in South Korea, raised as a proper woman, kind of had to fight against the patriarchy, kind of had to fight against like male assumptions about females, and kind of where females were grown in a society where males were treated better than females. And now this is the story of one particular female growing up in high school, going to school, getting good grades, going to university, starting a career, and then also ultimately having to give it up, mostly because society dictates that she's supposed to be a mother by a certain age or something's wrong with her. And then when she is a mother, she is expected to give up everything that she has ever loved about her career and her job so that she can take care of her husband and the family, which is kind of like ridiculous in that kind of sense. This book caused a lot of controversy in South Korea, and it also ultimately caused a lot of flack for the K-pop artists who actually read this book and who openly admitted to reading this book. And this one, I just gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. If you don't want to read this book, go check out the movie, because the movie was fantastic and it was well artistically made and done. So the next book that I want to talk about is actually another book that was recommended to me from another K-pop artist, and this one is a classic horror novel that was translated into English, and I absolutely adored it. This one is called Perfume and is by Patrick Susskind, and basically it's the story of this baby that kind of grew up to be really weird, and this baby doesn't have any scent. It causes a lot of people to be really upset. There's really no explanation as to why this baby causes so much fear in people, but it just does. And this child kind of just grows up from an orphanage, being abandoned by everybody who's caring for him, and he grows up in a very sad life, except for the fact that there's just something underlying about him that is really wrong, and that people think that the devil is actually involved in it. So basically, he has this extraordinary talent of smelling things, and he can smell anything from near, far, between walls. He can differentiate between people, and he can also tell apart different woods. It was just fantastic. It was very atmospheric. It was very dark. It was very creepy. And basically, this is ultimately the story of him kind of going really obsessed with scent and creating perfumes, and him ultimately also killing people in the end. This one, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I highly recommend it to you to check it out if you like gothic classics and fiction novels like that. So another book that I read was actually by Courtney Milan. Courtney Milan is like a half Chinese, half white author, and I've been meaning to read a lot of her books, mostly because a lot of my friends have been recommending her historical romances to me, but I just never had the time, and also slept on her a lot. But I'm willing to correct my wrongs with this book, because I absolutely love this really short novella. This one's called The Pursuit Of, and I actually talked about it in my diverse historical romance video that I uploaded during the historical romance readathon. Definitely go check it out if you guys haven't already. But this one is basically between two male characters, and one of them is black, one of them is white, and it discusses the interracial relationship that they have and how difficult it was just to be homosexual in the past, and also to be in an interracial relationship. It starts off with a story about these two people from opposite ends. One is American and one is British, and they are literally on opposite ends of the battlefield. But what happens is that our American soldier actually saves the British soldier, and now the British soldier decides to follow along our American soldier throughout different places in America so that he can travel back home and he can see if his family is safe and he's okay, even though he knows that they are enslaved, because back then slaves still existed. So I love this book. It talked a lot about like race. It talked a lot about how difficult it is, and it just really talked about like how they really struggle to be with each other and to really accept that they can be together even though they're different races. And phenomenal. Really enjoyed it. Gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And I took 1 star off, I think mostly because there were some areas that kind of like weren't spicy enough for me, but other than that, it was perfect. I think like one of the last historical romances that I want to talk about in this video is actually one that is not indie published because it's published by Entangle Publishing, but this one's called Willful Depravity by Ingrid Han. And now this one featured a plus size heroine that I hardly ever see in historical romances. So I was super excited to get started on this one. It's fairly short. No, I'm just joking. It's 300 pages, just checked it, but it goes by really fast is what I'm trying to say. It's about a plus size heroine who is constantly mocked by society, who are being told that she will never marry and that she has to marry down, mostly because of her appearance. And it talks about her self-esteem, but it also talks about her liberating herself from these society impressions of what a proper lady is supposed to look like. And I just really enjoyed our heroine because although she was beaten down by society and sometimes she felt like that she was in the dumps, she still was willing to stand up for herself and to be strong enough for herself, which I really liked. And this is kind of like the story of her falling in love with the Duke, who just is in love with her, and our Duke dealing with some very serious daddy issues, who is really cruel and abusive. So if you guys are not into fat phobia, if you guys are not into cruelty happening to our characters, then definitely don't check out this book. I really like the diversity in this book and I like the representation. This one I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm going to upload a video where I talk about some classics that I have read, but it was kind of a Jane Austen focused video, so I don't want to go too deeply into the Jane Austen novels that I did read in January, but I will talk about one classic that I have read that wasn't Jane Austen but triggered me to reading Jane Austen, and that just so happens to be Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So back in January, it was kind of a weird reading month, and it's still kind of a weird reading month for me in February, but with January, basically what happened was that I was kind of in a reading funk. I was in between readathons. I didn't know what I was going to read next, and I decided that I'm going to read some dry classic thinking that I'm not going to like it, but what turns out is that I absolutely fell in love with Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre reads kind of easily, so if you guys are intimidated by classics, then this one is okay, but I definitely will warn you that this one is around like 500 pages, so it's a very thick book, but it tells the story of Jane Eyre, who is our main heroine, who was kind of born in a kind of sucky situation. It's not that she was born in a poor family, but it was just the fact that the family that took her in and was raising her didn't want to spend any pennies on her. So she was kind of forced into this really repressive life, and then she kind of moved in between boarding schools, and then she became a governess, and then that's where she kind of fell in love with our main hero in this very dark and, you know, mysterious estate. And this is kind of like talking about like the issues that happen on the estate, the ghosts, lots of imagery and lots of metaphors and lots of wonderful things that we always love about classic novels. I really enjoyed this book. I loved my time in it. I thought that the remarks were pretty strong. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The reason why I took a 1 star off was because the ending of Jane Eyre's, like, you know, reasoning to like go back to our hero, I was just like, we could have built this a little bit stronger, but took off a star in the end. So I guess I did pretty well with this month with summarizing all the books that I really enjoyed, and I'm giving you like high star ratings. So let's balance things out and let's actually talk about one book, and it's going to be the last book that I'm talking about, but it's the one book that kind of disappointed me and that really struck me as, what was she thinking? What is this book? So basically this book is called The Virgin and the Rogue by Sophie Jordan, and Sophie Jordan has been an author that I kind of rave towards my friends. I don't rave towards you guys, mostly because I forgot to mention her in any of my videos, and I just have this assumption that she is one of my favorite historical romance authors, and she is, because she writes a lot of good chemistry and intimacy, and it just kind of comes off the pages. But this book I just didn't really like. This one I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, and the reason is because it was just kind of dumb. It's about a main heroine who suffers cramps, and then so her sister does, like, you know, medicine, so she decides to make her a potion to help her get over her cramps during her time of the month. And then what happens is that she actually turns her sister into going into heat, where she becomes obsessed with like male bodies and, like, you know, getting rid of that heat and getting all that good hot stuff and juicy stuff. But other than that, I felt like the plot really lacked in a lot of things. It was just built purely on this potion and built purely on her having heat. So I was just like very confused by this book. So ultimately I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I was really struggling to finish this book for the historical romance readathon, but I'm glad I finished it because I at least finished a new release. But that is it for all the books that I wanted to mention that I read in January. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you guys took away some books that you can add to your TBR for the Black Romance Readathon. I'm going to list all the creators or all the people involved down in my description box, and then hopefully you guys can check them out and join the readathon. It's a fantastic readathon. I'm really excited to see all these new books that I never tried before, and also new authors that I never tried before, and there's lots of recommendations floating around in the hashtag, so really great to see. Hopefully you guys have a nice week. I don't know where I'm going with this outro, but I'll see you guys later. Also, sorry for the lighting. It's just not great, but bye.